Hey everyone, welcome to the cabin. My name's Alec Britz, and today we're talking about the Warm Audio WA-1B. This is Warm Audio's take on one of the most legendary optical compressors of all time. Full disclosure, Warm Audio have sent this unit to me and I have had it for a couple of weeks, but that will not influence this review in any way, shape or form. With all that being said, if you enjoy what you watch here, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to support the channel, then consider dropping a super thanks. That really goes a long way to help me to upload more consistently. Alright, let's jump right into the Warm Audio WA-1B. On the front of the device we have our output gain, underneath that we have our attack, then we have our ratio control from 2 to 1 to 10 to 1. Then we have our release controls, we have our attack-release setting, then we have our threshold control that starts at the off position all the way to -40. Then we have the opportunity to select what our meter is going to be showing. We have input, we have output, and we have compression to show our gain reduction that's happening. Underneath that we have our sidechain controls. We have the off position where it is not listening to anything, and then we have the option for 2 sidechain inputs on the rear. We then have our meter calibration part, which allows us to be able to calibrate the unit to 0 dB every time you turn it on, so you can accurately see how much gain reduction you are actually doing. We then have our 2 switches. One of them is a bypass switch, and on this device when you hit bypass it will bypass the entire circuit. So you're not catching the sound of the transformers in the bypass, this is a hard relay bypass. We then have that beautiful big red lamp and our power switch. The power switch is on the front of the device, which is always very appreciated. On the rear of the device we have our IEC input, as well as a switch to be able to change between 110 and 230 volts. We then have our sidechain inputs. These are not labeled on this device, but hopefully in the future they will be. I would assume the left one to be 1 and the right one to be number 2. We then have our outputs. Our outputs are on XLR as well as TRS. And then we have our input, which is also on XLR and TRS. One of the really cool features about this device is the fact that it has Lundell transformers in it. Lundell transformers are really cool to me because they're not the usual conventional type of transformers. Every time I've ever seen them in a different brand, I get really excited to hear them because it's not what I'm used to hearing with everybody putting the same Carnhill transformers and everything. Something else that was kind of interesting to me was the fact that this device, after it is manufactured, gets sent back to Texas and then is hand inspected to ensure that everything is working as it should be before it arrives with you in your house. For our first example, we're going to be putting the WA-1B on the kick drum. This is what it sounds like in the actual groove. Tightens up that bottom end so well without it feeling choked. It feels punchy, but at the same time we get that beautiful extension of the kick drum as the release happens. Very, very handy. So next up we're going to try this on the snare drum. The snare is a really interesting thing for me here, and I really want you to focus on the low mids of the snare. So I'm hitting that quite hard intentionally, firstly to show you how hard you can hit this thing without it really even breaking a sweat, but also to show you how you can improve the groove of a song with your attack and release settings. So let's take a listen. So we get to, the snare feels like it's being pulled back a little bit in the mix, but the length of it feels really solid. And with these kind of brushes tones, it just makes it feel like it's more part of the record. So I've separated out my overheads into 2 mono channels so that I can process each of them individually. Doing such a good job of controlling the transients and adding a little bit more of that low mid-range information. This is one of those times where I wish we had an 80 or a 150 Hz sidechain so that I could get the compression between the kick drum and the snare drum a little bit more evenly matched. I'm going to bounce this out, then I'll do the same for the right channel, and I'll see you in a second. Again, I am hitting this pretty hard, but I want to point out that in doing that, you get that beautiful squelchy tube tone that I absolutely love with an optical compressor on overheads. Next up, we have bass guitar. That is so solid. It adds this low mid-range pump, and sometimes I feel like with this compressor, it almost feels like there's an extra octave just slotted into the bottom, and it's working damn hard. That's like, you know, up to, what, 9 dBs of gain reduction, and it's not even breaking a sweat. There's no distortion. It's just sounding fuller and tighter and kind of pulls it forward into the mix, which is absolutely gorgeous. One of my favorite uses for this so far has been on electric guitar. I'm going to use my blend control here within Logic to bypass and bring it back in so that we can really hear the difference between the two. This thing adds weight to anything you put through it. Next up, we have acoustic guitars. Let's jump right into it. When I tracked this acoustic guitar, I used a pair of U67s, I believe, and that really adds to the harmonic content of an already harmonic and transient rich source. So adding a tube compressor on top of that, the way that the optical side of it is working, is kind of clamping down on some of the more boisterous tones out of the J45, which are a little bit low, mid, heavy, and I kind of like the way that makes it sit within the mix. Right, next up we have our lead vocal. I've saved this to last because it's the one that I'm most excited to try out.
I can be a getaway from the years of the pain, from the fear of the change. You need me to validate when you're most insecure, and I'm not really sure about it. I'm around, but I'm not gonna lie with you. I'm around, but I'm not gonna lie for you.
It's crazy how finished that sounds, considering there's no equalization. It's only been melodined and then the WA-1B put on top. It's such a good vocal compressor. And once again, it's working quite hard without any distortion happening. So, the WA-1B. I really love the way this device shines on things like vocals, bass guitar, and electric guitar. One of my favorite things about this compressor is how it draws your focus to whatever it is on. So that means for something like bass guitar, when you're doing some heavy gain reduction, it feels like the bass is louder in the mix without it necessarily actually being louder. This allows for more headroom and kind of pulls things forward and gives you more space as a mixer to place things exactly where you want it to go. Having tracked male vocals, female vocals, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, bass, and even mono piano through this device, I have no problem recommending it. But that's not to say that there aren't a few things I would love to see improved on this device. The first of which, of course, is a blend control. Just because the original doesn't have it, doesn't mean you can't. And there have been a couple times where I want to use very excessive gain reduction, but would love to blend that in. Now, of course, within the box, you can do that in the I/O plugin in Logic, but for tracking, I sometimes want to do some pretty heavy gain reduction and have some of the original dry signal brought in. The next thing that I would love to see added to this is, of course, a 40, 80, and 120 Hz sidechain. Of course, we do have two independent sidechain options that are brought into this box, but having the opportunity to just have fixed frequency sidechaining would be very useful without having to use additional patch points on my patch bay or using additional outputs of my interface. So there we have it. That is the Warm Audio WA-1B compressor. If you have any questions about the WA-1B, drop it in the comments down below. I'd love to answer your comments, so please feel free to do that. Thank you so very much for watching. If you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, then please consider subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel, then consider dropping a super thanks. That allows me to upload more consistently. Most importantly, I hope that you're all looking after yourselves and you're being kind. I'll see you in the next video.